The courtroom was unusually quiet that morning, the kind of silence that feels heavier than noise, as if everyone inside sensed that something important was about to happen, though no one could explain why, and Judge Frank Caprio, seated calmly behind the bench, glanced down at the docket in front of him, scanning names and violations with the practiced eyes of a man who had seen tens of thousands of cases, most of them routine, many of them forgettable, yet every now and then one that would stay with him forever. And when the clerk called out case number 25 MC774391, State versus Maria Alvarez, a woman slowly stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a worn brown envelope to her chest, her clothes modest and clearly old but clean, her eyes tired in a way that suggested years of struggle rather than a single bad night, and as she stood before the bench, Judge Caprio looked up and immediately noticed what he always noticed first. Not the charges, not the fines, but the person, the human being standing in front of him, carrying a story no paperwork could fully capture, and he spoke gently. "Good morning. How are you today?" To which the woman hesitated before answering, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm okay, Your Honor," though it was clear she was anything but, and as the clerk began to read the charges, the weight of the situation slowly unfolded for everyone in the room. Driving with a broken taillight, failure to appear in court multiple times, expired registration, unpaid parking violations dating back over 6 years, and repeated late fees and penalties that had compounded over time until the total amount due had reached an astonishing $1 million, a number so large that a murmur rippled through the courtroom as people exchanged looks of disbelief, and even Judge Caprio paused for a brief moment, his eyebrows lifting slightly as he absorbed the figure, because while he had seen large fines before, this amount stood out as something almost absurd, especially for what began as a simple traffic violation, and he leaned forward, resting his hands on the bench, and said calmly, "Ms. Alvarez, do you understand that according to the record, the total fines and penalties in your case amount to $1 million? And the woman nodded slowly, tears already forming in her eyes. "Yes, Your Honor. They told me," and he asked the question he always asked next, the one that often opened the door to the truth. "Before we go any further, tell me a little about yourself. What do you do for a living?" And the woman swallowed hard before answering. "I clean houses, Your Honor. When I can find the work," and Judge Caprio nodded. "And how much do you earn?" And she hesitated again, embarrassed. "Some weeks maybe $200. Some weeks nothing." And the judge glanced back at the paperwork, then up at her again. "And how old are you, Ms. Alvarez?" 42, she replied softly, and he continued. "Do you have any family? Children?" And at this, her composure finally cracked, and she pressed the envelope tighter to her chest as she answered. "Yes, Your Honor. I have 2 sons, 12 and 9, and the judge's voice softened further. "And are you raising them by yourself?" And she nodded, tears now streaming freely down her face. Their father passed away 6 years ago, and at that moment something shifted in the room, because 6 years ago was the same year the violations had begun piling up, the same year the missed court dates started appearing in the record, and Judge Caprio noticed the connection immediately, as he so often did, because experience had taught him that numbers on a page often hit a turning point in someone's life, and he asked quietly, "Ms. Alvarez, what happened 6 years ago?" And she took a deep breath, struggling to speak through her tears. "My husband was killed in a construction accident. A wall collapsed. He died instantly," and the courtroom fell completely silent, the kind of silence where even the sound of breathing feels too loud, and Judge Caprio removed his glasses, something he did unconsciously when he was truly listening, and he said gently, "I'm very sorry for your loss," and she nodded, wiping her face. "After he died, everything fell apart. I couldn't work for months. I couldn't think. I couldn't sleep. The tail light broke, but I couldn't afford to fix it, and then I got a ticket, and then another, and then letters started coming, but I was scared to open them," and she paused, her voice shaking. "I thought if I ignored it, it would go away." And Judge Caprio nodded slowly. "It never does," he said softly, not as a reprimand, but as a sad truth both of them already knew, and he looked again at the $1 million total and said, "Ms. Alvarez, I want to be very clear with you. There is no possible way you could ever pay $1 million. Is that fair to say?" And she let out a broken, humorless laugh. "Yes, Your Honor. Even if I work my whole life." And he leaned back in his chair, folding his hands, and for a long moment he said nothing, letting the silence do the work, and then he asked a question that no one in the courtroom expected, a question that would later become the moment millions of people replayed online. "Ms. Alvarez, what would happen to your children if you were taken to jail over this?" And the woman froze, her eyes widening in fear. "They would go to foster care, Your Honor. I have no one else." And Judge Caprio closed his eyes briefly, because he had seen that outcome too many times, children punished for mistakes they never made, and when he opened them again, his voice was steady but filled with emotion. "The purpose of the law is to correct behavior, not to destroy families." And he turned to the prosecutor. "Counsel, do you believe sending this woman to jail or demanding $1 million serves justice?" And the prosecutor hesitated, then shook his head. "No, Your Honor. And Judge Caprio nodded. Neither do I, and he turned back to Ms. Alvarez. But I also can't ignore the fact that laws were broken, and she nodded quickly. I understand, Your Honor. I just wanted to explain, and he picked up his pen, and the courtroom held its breath as he began to speak. Ms. Alvarez, here's what we are going to do. I am dismissing all failure to appear penalties, all late fees, and all compounded fines, and gasps echoed softly through the room as he continued. The original violations will be reduced to the base amount, and he paused, checking the numbers. That brings your total to $400, and the woman looked up in disbelief. 400. And Judge Caprio held up his hand gently. Let me finish, and he continued. You will not pay that today. Instead, you will pay $10 a month, and the woman covered her mouth with her hand, sobbing openly now, and Judge Caprio's voice softened even more. And Ms. Alvarez, if at any point you can't afford that $10 because your children need food, or clothes, or school supplies, you come back to this courtroom, and we will talk about it. And he paused, then added, because no child should suffer because their parent couldn't fix a taillight. And the courtroom erupted into quiet. Applause, something rare and quickly silenced by the bailiff, but the emotion lingered, and Ms. Alvarez struggled to speak, finally managing. Thank you, Your Honor. You saved my life. And Judge Caprio shook his head gently. No, Ms. Alvarez. You did. By standing here today, and as she walked out of the courtroom, shoulders lighter than they had been in years, Judge Caprio looked down at the next case on the docket. But everyone in the room knew they had just witnessed something special, a reminder that justice without compassion is incomplete, and that sometimes the most powerful rulings are not the ones that punish, but the ones that understand. And long after the courtroom doors closed behind Maria Alvarez, the story of the $1 million fine reduced by humanity would travel far beyond Providence, touching millions who would see in it not just a judge, but a man who never forgot that every case begins and ends with a human being.